great. You can see people are calling in from participating from all around the country. Oh, great hearing from you all. So just type and then hit enter at the end or return. That should work. And thank you for letting us know if there's more than one person there. That's really, really very helpful. As you probably realize, all the participants are muted, so we're going to be using that chat feature for any questions, problems, or comments. And during the webinar, I'll be collecting the questions, and time allowing, we'll pose as many as we can to our presenters at the end of their presentation. And I'll acknowledge your questions, so I'll let you know that I see your question. If I don't do that, then you might want to ask it again. Again, if there's any technical problems, call iLink 800-799-4510 or put your question in the chat box. And if you are joining us only by phone today, you can email me with your questions at suo@ncdbw.org, and I'll do my best I can to get back to you. We are recording this webinar today, and hopefully, unlike the last webinar, this recording feature actually works today. And then you'll be able to access this webinar, the recording and the PowerPoint itself, on our website, which is ncdbw.org. And that should be up in hopefully a week or so. And I will ask Katita to put that in, which she did. I think you already know that we've posted today's PowerPoint and a version that you can save or print, the presenters' full bios, and a handout that they actually created for the first webinar they did last week. And that's all up on Google Docs. The link was in your reminder note that you got in your box this morning, and Katita will post it here again. Thank you, Katita. If you're signed into iLink, you don't need to get the PowerPoint. You should be able to be seeing that on your screen right now. Also, right at the end of the webinar, I'll send out an email, and it will contain a confirmation of your attendance and a link to the posted recordings. It will have a link to our website and a very brief survey. And also at the very end of this webinar, we're trying a new feature where we're going to pop up that same evaluation. If you could fill it out either at the end of the webinar or if you could click on the link in that little follow-up email, it'd be really great. It's very valuable feedback to us at the National Clearinghouse and to the presenters. So we would appreciate it if you would do that. So right now, we just want to try to get a little more information about who you all are. It's helpful to us at the National Clearinghouse, but also our presenters again. So we're going to ask you some questions. And as you see here, what we're going to want you to do is to actually answer the questions by clicking on the little dots that appear on the screen. Okay? And then there's two questions where you say, well, other. And then if your answer is other, go ahead and put into the chat box what your answer is. So if you could let us know, good old technology. We try. Go right ahead and put it into the chat box because the other questions aren't pulling up. If you could just let us know what your profession is, that would be helpful.
I see the questions.
All of them?
The first
About
one.
Are you an OVW grantee?
Just the first one.
Just the first one. Yeah, the other ones aren't going up. And if you're an OVW grantee, if you could let us know, that's also helpful, in which grant program. That would also be great. So if you could add that, just put it right into the chat. That is helpful. Yeah, we didn't get the full questions. Technology. Okay, we're just going to go back here and move on. Anyway, Well, thank you all, and it's very helpful to see that in the chat box. So that gives us a lot of information there. So I really do appreciate it. All right. For those of you who just joined, I'm Sue Ostoff with the National Clearinghouse for the Defense of Battered Women. And again, I want to extend a warm welcome to all of you, and thank you for joining us. This is the 7th in our series of webinars about when survivors reenter their communities after jail or prison. And if you missed the other webinars in this series, recordings of the first 5 are posted on our website, which is at ncdbw.org, and Kakita will put that up again. Unfortunately, as I mentioned earlier, due to technical problems, our last very wonderful webinar, which is part 1 of this shorter series, by Becky and Georgia, who are 2 of our presenters today, was not recorded, and we're really so sad about that. But the first 5 were, and then when you go onto the website and you sign in and start listening, a copy of the PowerPoint starts, and you'll have access to the whole presentation. Also, links to the documents connected to those webinars are also there for you. Before I go any further, I do want to thank the Office on Violence Against Women for the support of this project on women's reentry. We think it's just really fabulous that they are supporting work on survivors who are reentering their communities. As you've noticed, all the participants are muted, and as I mentioned earlier, we will be collecting questions during the presentation, and time allowing, I will be asking as many as we can to the presenters at the end of their presentation. So, finally, as you're aware, today's webinar is Women at the Crossroads, Domestic Violence Survivors with Criminal Justice Histories, and this is part 2 of 2. And it's just a real pleasure to introduce these speakers today. I'm sorry for the very small print on the slide that is now showing. Their bios are way longer than this, and we did post the full bios on Google Docs, and I really encourage you to go and look at those full bios, because each of the presenters today has just a very rich and very wonderful set of experiences that are really relevant to our webinar today. It sounds like there's a little feedback back there, so if you're not muted, which you should be, you can mute yourself by using *6, and that may unmute you, and then you can mute yourself using *6. So it's a toggle, so it goes back and forth. Anyway, very briefly, which is hard to do to figure out a way of briefly speaking about these 3 skilled women, I just want to introduce first Becky Ney, who is a principal and a founding member of the Center for Effective Public Policy, which is a nonprofit organization that opened way back in 1981 right here in Philadelphia. I think you can see Becky's bio there, and again, I encourage you to read the full one. In the interest of time, I am going to move on. Georgia Lerner, she's the executive director of the Women's Prison Association, located in New York City, and both Becky will be talking about her organization, her project that she's currently the project director for, which is the National Resource Center on Justice Involved Women, and Georgia will be talking a bit about the Women's Prison Association, and both of them talked about their organizations in the last webinar. So I know many of you were on that last webinar, so I am going to move on and give a little fuller introduction to Sharon White Harrigan, who is the director of Drew House for Housing Plus Solutions, which is an organization that provides women with permanent housing while providing the necessary tools and skills for them to become self-sufficient. Sharon, all I can say is we wish there were more programs like yours around the country. I think everybody on this webinar would agree. Sharon became involved with women's advocacy during her 11 years in Bedford Hills Correctional Facility for Women, which is located in Westchester County outside of New York City. Once released in 2004, she focused on becoming the voice of the unheard and to promote change. Sharon is an active advocate and activist for women in and out of prison system, and is active with numerous organizations, many of them which work to assist incarcerated and formerly incarcerated people. She's a motivational speaker, and she's spoken numerous times around the country in all different kind of forums. And in her spare time, which I can't imagine she has any, she is working on her MSW. She's also a published poet, and the link is available on the Google Doc bio page, so you could get her book there. And all the proceeds of her book go to women in prison. So that's really wonderful. So I encourage you to go and look on Google Docs for that link. All our speakers today have so much valuable experience, and I know they have a ton of information, so I really want to get it turned over to them in just a second. But before I do that, if you're having any trouble connecting or technical problems, try calling iLink support at 800-799-4510. And if you have any other questions, just put them in the chat box down there in the lower left corner. And I am going to turn this over now to Becky Ney, and I just want to thank Becky, Georgia, and Sharon for all your great work, and thank you for your willingness to share it with us today. Thank you, guys. And Becky?
Thanks, Sue. Okay, you're going to have to flip a slide for me. I was working earlier, but now I am not. Thank you. So let me just talk just for a brief moment. As Sue mentioned, I'm the director of the National Resource Center on Justice-Involved Women, which is a resource that was funded both by the Bureau of Justice Assistance in partnership with the National Institute of Corrections. It's administered by my organization in partnership with the Women's Prison Association, Core Associates, the National Center on Trauma-Informed Care, the Moss Group, and University of Cincinnati and Orbis Partners. Next slide. So let me just carry on. I'm not being able to flip slides here, but the Resource Center provides a whole variety of documents, technical assistance, training to folks who work with justice-involved women. Women who may be in prison or in jail or on community supervision of some kind. Let's carry on to the next slide. Our website, you can see it up there in the top right corner. I encourage you to go there. We have a variety of resources on a number of different topics. You can sign up on our mailing list. You could receive bi-monthly newsletters. You could ask for technical assistance and training on a variety of topics. And that's enough said about us. Let me turn it over to you, Georgia, to talk briefly about the Women's Prison Association.
Thanks, Becky. The Women's Prison Association is a direct service organization. We are in New York City, and we work with women who are in New York City and returning to New York City after a period of incarceration. We were founded in the mid-1800s, and since then have worked with women individually to help them reestablish lives after a period of incarceration, but also have been doing a lot of work since then to divert women from going into the criminal justice system at all. We advocate for alternative responses to women who have been arrested so that we can avoid having women get locked up, and over the last 20 years or so have really advocated for the use of evidence-based interventions that get at the root causes of criminal conduct so that we can, we hope, eventually put ourselves out of business. A lot of the work that we're doing is family-based work, and a lot of the work that we do is also focused on trying to get the systems that women come into contact with to be more responsive so that women have better experiences and are less likely to have infractions and problems with them when they are locked up or interacting with them. And I think that's, that's kind of the short story. Now I guess Becky will move on to the recap from last week.
Okay, so I'm just going to spend a brief moment highlighting some of these points, and as Sue talked about earlier, the full PowerPoint from the last session with all this information on it is available through Google. And I typically tend to err on the side of putting way too many words on slides, just because I want you to be able to have that after the fact and remember what the conversation was. But let's just briefly review some things. And one of the things I said on the last webinar is that I ask you to understand that the information and data that we're talking about now comes out of the corrections field, where we use the language women offenders or justice-involved women. So I apologize in advance to those who may prefer formerly incarcerated women or other language, and just know that this comes out of a particular body of research. So what do we know about justice-involved women? We know that they are largely nonviolent. We know that we lock up people of color at greater rates than we lock up Caucasian women. We know that 62% of the women in prison are moms of children. We know that 3 to 5% of those entering prisons or jails may be pregnant at the time that they come into the facility. We know that a high rate of inmates in jails and prisons are victims of abuse, maybe long-time abuse, maybe more recent abuse, and I'm talking about sexual abuse, physical abuse, neglect, and that sort of thing. And startling, Georgia talked about this at the last session, 75% of the women incarcerated have experienced intimate partner violence, which is quite a significant number. And what we're observing and learning more from research as well is that there are extremely high rates of trauma among the women that we see incarcerated. And some numbers and studies I've seen that's really about 90%, maybe over that. So quite a significant number of women who have experienced intimate partner violence, have experienced physical and sexual abuse in some form or another, as well as violence in their lives. In terms of pathways, we talked some at the last session about the differences between men and women, and we do observe that there are many differences of the women who come to us in criminal justice and corrections. The pathways research is about 20 or 30 years old now, but really talks about the fact that women sort of get into crime for very different reasons than men do, and they come to be locked up in facilities for very different reasons. There seems to be a cycle of what I will call victimization, substance abuse, and poverty. One of those things may come before the others, or they may get mixed up, or they may be a cycle, but we observe that women are more likely to be in poverty, or more likely to be unemployed, or more likely to be using drugs or substances, perhaps to self-medicate, are more likely to be victims, and are more likely to have mental health issues when they come into jails and prisons. And I think most importantly about that, what we observe about men is that the abuse typically stops, but for women it can continue well into adulthood. In terms of some challenges and what we see in how women are when they are in prisons or on supervision, in part we see that women have high rates of misconduct while they are inside. They may have a lot of parental stress if they are parents because they don't see their children. We may see that they have very complex issues about maintaining child care, about maintaining their parental rights. We observe that they have that we as women are very relational, and the relationship can be about why she is participating in crime. The relationship can be about why she is in a relationship that that becomes violent, why she fails or does not fail in treatment, and what her relationships are with family. On supervision, we see many of the same issues as well, and the issues related to children continue to be complex. They may take a long time to talk because they're trying to figure out if we are someone that they can trust. And I think what's most important, certainly about the women that I talk to and in the training that I do with corrections officers, is that, you know, the women really expect us to help them. Very different from the men. And so I think that's sort of a lesson for us as we go forward. Other challenges, women may be homeless. They may have a number of children that are either in their custody or not. We often find that they are marginalized and disconnected both economically and in other ways. They may be on public assistance. They may be working with child welfare organizations. They may be worried that their children will be removed from their home. So there are just multiple challenges for women, and let's not forget that if they are justice involved women, typically if they're coming out of prisons and jails, then they're going to be on some kind of a community supervision as well, and therefore have to comply with a number of additional things that normally wouldn't have to be worried about. So reentry challenges. I think it's becoming self-evident if we haven't talked about it already. I think for women coming out of institutions, it's not enough to find a house to live in. It really has to be safe housing. It's not enough to simply be employed at McDonald's or a minimum wage job. It becomes critically important to be able to earn enough to take care of yourself and your family and have an independent wage where you don't have to be worried about living with your abuser, say. I think reuniting with children is a huge issue for women, especially coming out of prison, who may have been away for a longer period of time, who may or may not have been able to maintain relationships with their children. I've mentioned the fact that there are supervision conditions, there may be benefit issues, safety planning, and certainly accessing services. And lastly, we talked about sort of a more comprehensive approach, if you will, to thinking about reentry for domestic violence survivors and for women reentering from institutions. I am fond of saying, as are many in the field, that reentry starts at intake. So as soon as a woman hits the facility, we ought to be planning for her release, no matter how many months or years it might be. What do we know about what she could be working on in terms of case plans and networks and housing from the very beginning? As she is beginning to come close to the end of her sentence, what are her strengths and protective factors that she has that can be contributing to her success when she gets outside? Are there needed medical or mental health issues that we need to be taking care of? What have we been able to talk to her in terms of healthy relationships and what those look like? And what are we doing about what I will call survival issues, namely housing and employment as being most important? And then lastly, how are we linking all those things to treatment, to legal services, excuse me, transportation, child care services, and other things? And I'll just end by saying that we need to think about how we can work more collaboratively together as a criminal justice system, as community service providers and others to coordinate to the extent that we can, to cross-train to the extent that we can, and I just end with what some women have said in numerous studies about what has been important to them in terms of being able to be successful. And it really has to do with safe environments, employment and financial support, significant networks of positive support and peer networks, and positive role models, of which all of you are for the women that are coming out of criminal justice. So that's a very fast overview of what we talked about the last time, and again, the PowerPoint slides are available. So I'm going to turn it over to Georgia to talk about some of the collateral consequences and to Sharon to talk about her experiences.
The next slide. So a lot of what Becky talked about, some of what I'm talking about here is repetitive, but the reason that women need those things, that what they summarize in terms of needing those good role models and those strong relationships and the safe housing, and really our help and people who really are rooting for them and providing the strong assistance and being consistent role models and mentors and supports, is because no matter how much hard work they've done and paid their debt and done what the criminal justice has said they've had to do, is there are these collateral consequences that continue to arise after someone has been convicted of a crime. And these are the kinds of things that we will find our clients, certainly at the Women's Prison Association, that people are facing throughout their lifetimes. And some things we can help with, and sometimes women come to us 10 years after they have been released from prison or jail because they thought that they had moved past their criminal justice involvement and something arises. And sometimes it's something that they're aware of very soon after their involvement. So these are things to keep in mind so that we can be aware of how we can help someone plan for it and get around it. Because as I said last week, and as I say to staff every day, and as I try to say to clients, whether it's at work or other places, we come to work every day expecting the door to be slammed in our face. I mean, this is why we're here. We're expecting the doors to be closed. And it is our job always to find another way to get to where we need to be. This is our job. I mean, there is always a way to get closer to where our clients want to be. We can't accept no as the last answer. We may not get there exactly the way we want to be, the route that we thought we would get there, but there's definitely a way for us and for our clients to get closer to the destination that they want to get to. So it is really our job to help people find a way to get to that safer place to live. It may not be the final, best apartment that they want to be living in right now, but really that is our job, to help people get to a better situation a step at a time. So let's think about what some of those issues are. Well, the first issue is that someone has a criminal record, and sometimes someone will have a felony conviction, and she thinks, I went away because I was convicted of, maybe it was a manslaughter conviction, whatever it was. And she comes out, and she has to fill out job applications, and a lot of what we counsel people about is how to complete job applications, and we always tell people, be honest, and I hope that that is the advice that you are giving people. It is never a good thing to tell people to lie. However, the other piece of advice that we have to give people is to take the extra step of going and looking at your rap sheet and finding out what somebody else is going to find if they do a criminal background check. Because often there is incorrect information or excessive information on somebody's rap sheet, so that every charge that was ever considered is still on a rap sheet. So as a community provider or whatever position you're in, you may be able to help somebody get free legal assistance to clean up a rap sheet, because often there are extraneous charges on somebody's rap sheet that will really get in the way. And I know that it's a very difficult process when somebody, comes up with a way to talk about and really account for how she did come to be, convicted of whatever the crime was that she did time for, whatever her actual circumstances were. But then when she's faced with additional charges and pieces of information that she really can't answer for, or that were negotiated away, or really didn't have anything to do with her, it's a surprise and she's taken off guard. So it's very important to help somebody face the full picture of what is on her rap sheet or what somebody else is going to find so she can account for it. It's worth it, and it's very helpful if you have people who can be advocates and help somebody do that. It's also, it can be very painful, because we have seen that although it is illegal to discriminate based on criminal justice history in many, many situations, it is still something that is done informally in so many ways. And this is where it can be helpful to have mentors and other people who don't necessarily have a formal or a legal role in relation to a client, not necessarily an attorney, but sometimes a mentor or a friend or a case planner, but someone who helps a client feel strong enough to stand up for herself and say, it is not okay for you to discriminate against me in this apartment based on the fact that I have this conviction. Because it's not always legal, but people don't feel confident about standing up and saying that somebody shouldn't discriminate. And I know certainly in New York, the Office of Human Rights is a place that can be helpful. Even helping clients or helping helping women or other people find a place that they can go to make complaints and get some assistance is useful. And women who have been victims of domestic violence and other kinds of violence are often afraid that abusers or other victimizers will find them if they bring attention to themselves. So recognizing that there's another layer of fear that prevents women from seeking assistance is very important. Economics and employment. So more than half of the women who go into the prison system have not completed high school and have not had legal employment in the 6 months prior to being arrested. And when they come home, it's about the same number who haven't completed high school. And while for men, having a high school diploma is actually quite helpful in terms of improving their economic circumstances, for women, it's having some college that makes the real difference in reducing recidivism and increasing their economics and improving their economic circumstances. So it's very important that we help women improve their economic circumstances by accessing higher education. So it's really important that we help women get higher education. And women, it's hard to get educational funding if you have a criminal justice history. And almost all of the women we see are poor. So, the collateral consequences of having the criminal justice system being poor in the first place, having gone to prison, all of these things really make it more difficult. And plus the fear of your victimizer being around the corner and, coming out, or his family or someone else coming out and saying that you are not deserving, often will really prevent women from seeking to take advantage of educational opportunity or job training programs, or even feeling like they deserve to go to school or do anything to better themselves. So sometimes there's a tremendous, it's really important to support women in getting the psychological help they need to recognize that they deserve to do better and to improve and feel better as human beings and take advantage of this kind of opportunity. In terms of housing, safe housing, of course, is a huge issue, as Becky brought up. Having safe housing is important to being able to reunite with kids. It's especially difficult to find safe housing in terms of cost and being able to get your children back. Cost is a big issue, and also finding a neighborhood where you can afford to live. And neighborhoods are a consideration if you're trying to stay away from a former abuser or get to a place that's safe and away from that family. Other issues, immigration. Now, this is an interesting one. In cases where, Sharon will talk about her experience a little bit, well, more than a little, but in this country, we send people to prison. We are happy to pay for people to go to prison if they are here illegally, but when they come home from prison, we will deport them to their home countries. But often if you see people before they have been convicted of a crime, if you know that somebody is in a domestic violence situation, sometimes that fact can be a mitigating factor and can have an impact on their ability to get asylum. So it is something to keep in mind. And so if you have clients who are in domestic violence situations, it is worth reaching out to your local indigent immigration defense bar. And then in terms of collateral consequences for the civic implications, in some states, people who have felony convictions are not allowed to vote. In many states, people who have felony convictions are allowed to vote after they are off parole. A lot of people think that once they have gone to prison or been convicted of any crime, they are never allowed to vote again, and that is just not the case. So it is important that you advise clients that they are allowed to vote and help people, take advantage of their right to vote, and also to apply for public assistance and for federal aid or other kinds of aid that are available to them for education and for health care and for food assistance and things like that. So, I think the underlying kind of bigger issue for women, so many of whom have been victimized, really the vast majority of women, many really very brutally and for most of their lives, that underlying experience that is how they really feel about themselves, that they have been victimized and that they do not deserve to be treated in another way, or that they are not necessarily, they don't deserve other things that are available, often makes our clients act as though this is just the way the world is, and they don't recognize that there is another way that they could be living or should be living, and it is our job to help people see that they can expect and should expect a higher level of minimum, a kind of higher level of minimum life experience, which includes being respected when they go places and being able to get basic health care and being able to have a criminal record reflect what is actually true, and being able to live a basic existence and find safe housing. And, I'm not talking about luxury, but really they should be able to have the basics met and feel like they deserve it and feel okay about who they are. So we really need to help people support getting those things. So now I'm going to turn to the more, I think, illuminating part of, that's the review from what we covered last week. And now I want to talk to, I think, the more exciting and illuminating part of this week's talk, which is that Sharon Waite Harrigan is a professional woman who has been very generous in public in sharing about her experience as a woman who had survived a domestic violence situation and then also was in the criminal justice system. And she did some significant time in the system and has worked with people who have survived domestic violence situations and has also worked with men and women who have come through the criminal justice system in different agencies. She went through the Women's Advocacy Project, which is a program at the Women's Prison Association. She has worked with the Fortune Society, and now she runs this program at Drew House, which is at a colleague agency of the Women's Prison Association. It's at Housing Plus Solutions. It's a residence that's an alternative to incarceration for families. It's really a wonderful program at an agency that Rita Zimmer started, and I'm really very honored that Sharon has agreed to speak with all of us today. And I wonder, Sharon, if you would be willing to start just by sharing for a couple of minutes your story about how you came to be an advocate and a voice for women with criminal justice and domestic violence histories.
Well, absolutely. First, I would just like to say it's truly an honor and a privilege for me to participate in this, and thank you so much. I'm really grateful. My advocacy actually for the women in the criminal justice system, even just women and men, began because I was incarcerated. And so I really didn't know much about the population until I went to prison. And I went to prison for defending myself. I was being attacked, and the man was attempting to rape me, and unfortunately it didn't end well for him. But fortunately I was able to come out the situation. But prior to that, I was in a marriage at a young age where I was married to an ex-professional boxer who he had apparently a whole lot of issues going on with him. At the time, it really didn't even cross my mind that there was presenting issues then, But being young, prior to that, going through the death of my fiance, who got killed 3 days before our wedding day and my 20th birthday. I immediately married a guy who I befriended, who we were friends, and he became my abuser. And so when I wind up in this predicament where I was about to be, raped and attacked, I realize now, after going through the process of looking back and going through, the cleansing of myself, that I could have possibly gotten out of that situation another way, but at the time it was the thought of another man is not going to hurt me, you're not going to control me, you're not going to do what you want to do with me. And so I think I lashed out in a way that ended very badly for him. So that thus began my road into the prison system. I was out for 2 years on bail, but wind up receiving a 9 to 18-year sentence, in which I did 11 years out of that.
So Sharon, as you said, your fiance had died suddenly before you were supposed to get married, which was awful, and then you married someone who was an ex-boxer. That was a terrible, abusive relationship, and then someone else tried to rape you, and you killed him.
Yes.
And that was not the person you had been in that long-term abusive relationship.
Not at all.
And you did 11 years.
Yes.
Wow. And you got out how long ago?
I got out, it will be 9 years in November. Wow. November 17th.
Okay. So you have been, and we've talked quite a bit, and I've gotten to know you, and I know that you've done a lot of different programs, and I know that you've been a leader in the advocacy community and I know many other people that you've spoken with, and for people who are interested, Sharon has also, you can go to the Correctional Association of New York website and also see a video that Sharon is in called Strength of a Woman. It's a very powerful, short 20-minute video, but it's worth looking at. So I wonder, we'll get to a lot of the different things that we've talked about, but when you think about coming home after that 11 years, you know, we talked about all that time, how time was really your enemy when you were inside. It was so long.
Yes.
And when you came home, what was helpful?
The support. While I was inside, you know, behind the walls, I got together a strong network system, you know, just meeting people, getting to know them, and understanding that you need help. You know, that was one of the things that I really battled with, is reaching out for help. You know, I was always like the independent type, you know, self-sufficient, and so to just say, you know, I can't do this alone. You know, my parents died while I was incarcerated. You know, my daughter grew up, had her own life, and so for me, what was helpful was knowing that people stood in support. They didn't judge me. They didn't look at me differently, you know, especially knowing that I was responsible for taking someone's life. You know, that's big. And so just to have the support and the love of people and the organizations that had providers and you know, practitioners and, you know, just caseworkers and social workers that was there to help. You know, there was just no judgment, no I had to do anything just to be involved. It was just, you know, we're here to help. And that was very helpful.
And were some of those people who were a support people who were also women who had been locked up with you?
Yes, but mostly, and I'm not saying this because, you know, we're on this conference together.
No, I mean, I know who some of the women are, right?
But the first organization that I was affiliated with when I came home was WPA.
Oh, okay. I did not know that. Okay. Well,
yes,
thank you, but I did not know that.
Absolutely.
Right.
And WPA, and they were also in the inside in Bedford Hills. There was a mentoring program that WPA had at the time, or has, and I was a part of that. So I had a mentor, and that was the best thing that could have ever happened for me. Coming home after 11 years, I didn't even know how to use a Metro card, okay, because when I left, it was still tokens, you know. So that was just, it embraced my heart, because although I wasn't scared in coming home, it felt foreign to me. And so just being able, and I was at WPA every day, that was my safe haven. You know, no lie, that was my safe haven, because people who were going there were formerly incarcerated, like myself, who has came home before me. Some people who were working there were also formerly incarcerated, and I thought that was awesome. And then the staff, you know, had some working knowledge. So that just was like a wraparound for me. That was the most helpful thing.
It's interesting, Sharon. One thing I've heard you say before, and I've heard other women say, is having a safe haven, especially for women who were survivors of violence, was that knowing there was a place to go that was a predictable place. It wasn't necessarily, even if there was nothing to do in particular, knowing there was a place to go where you could just be.
Yes.
Especially if someone wasn't living in if someone was living in a shelter, sometimes it's good to know there's a place to go during the day. Now, we also had talked about some things that weren't that helpful. I know you were living in a transitional residence. What things were not so helpful when you were coming back to the community, when you were transitioning?
Oh, well, what wasn't helpful, number one for me, is that being in a transitional parole residence and I will forever be grateful for that house. However, every day I was reminded that I had 6 months to go, and I had 5 months. I had 4 months and 3 weeks. I had, and it was an everyday, constant reminder. And along with getting acclimated back into the community, just finding out what road I need to travel now that I am home, and all of these other things, you don't need that constant reminder. Listen, you could tell me 1-2 times tops, this is a 6 months program. In this month, at the end of May, is your 6 months is up. And then I can work it from there, But that constant reminder made me more frustrated and I think unnecessarily stressed, when I didn't have to be. Because I was out every day. I was at WPA every day. And, I just even have to say this, that I actually was hired as a peer mentor at WPA. So, it wasn't just being able to go there every day and show that I'm diligent, that I'm able to, I'm serious about this, and they knew that I was out from the time I was able to walk out to the door until the time of curfew. My shoes smoking from just walking all over the place,
right.
That it just wasn't necessary. It wasn't helpful at all.
Well, I'm sure some of my colleagues who are listening to this conversation also probably have this experience of frustration. Of course, when people are locked up, time is the enemy in a lot of ways, and people can't wait for it to pass. But when we're on the outside working with people who are with us for a limited period of time, especially in housing, which is the number one demand that we have for women coming home who, really desperately are trying to find a legal way to support themselves, to reunite with family, but there's so much pressure on us to provide affordable, safe housing, and we have a limited period of time to do that in shelter settings. And we really struggle to find, other places for women to move to and that are affordable. And so we really feel the pressure as providers too. So
as well.
I think we're in partnership and trying to make that better.
Yeah.
Let's see on the next slide. I think, something else we talked about was when you were locked up for 11 years and how even after coming home, we go to the next slide, I guess, Sue. For women who are locked up for a shorter period of time, maybe women who, in your case where someone died and or were other cases where someone who was a victim harmed someone and is locked up for a longer period of time. But someone who's locked up for a shorter period of time might come home and still be in a very active state of fear of the abuser. Maybe not, really he may be out or, go out in the neighborhood and the circumstances may not be changed at all when she comes home. So I wonder if you have thoughts about the difference between someone who has survived violence coming home after being gone for a short sentence and how that's different from someone coming home after being gone for a long time like you were.
Well, probably one of the biggest differences would be that if someone did a long period of time, would generally mean that the abuser was killed or that they were, sentenced for, attempted murder or murdering the abuser as opposed to someone with a short sentence. So with someone coming home after a long period of time, they would I definitely need counseling, support services. They would definitely need people who are trauma informed, that can specifically cater to the kind of trauma that they suffered through. And as you said it, people with shorter sentences, they might have been there under different circumstances, yet still actively involved with their abuser and not really seeing it that way. They might know, yeah, he's not supposed to put his hands on me, but I love him, and they come up with all different kind of excuses, and they don't really have time to sit back and to think about their life, what, the things that is going on in their life, and I've always I've seen it year after year after year that the ones who did have a short sentence has a tendency of recidivism, of coming back, and they still actively involved because if they're not actively involved with their abuser, but it could possibly be with criminal activity, well, naturally because they're in prison, but substance abuse and all, there's a lot of other dynamics that come along with that, whereas long-term is, regardless of what their situation was, after a long period of time, you have the opportunity of working on yourself, work through your issues, and so they're coming home, their needs are different. They're more in need of support on how to coping skills, how to cope with the world as it is today, because it might be different than it was. It's going to be different than 15 years ago.
Right. I mean, I think it seems, I'm hearing a lot about a lot of the women who we see who have gone to jail with often seem, with these shorter sentences, their children are, often they're still very actively involved with their children, and they may not have very regular involvement or very consistent parenting relationships with their children, but they are very conflicted over stress in their relationships with family and family dysfunction, and they are actively using drugs, and they are they haven't done safety planning. They are very much caught up actively in all of the risks for their criminal behavior.
Yes.
And need safety, there is not any safety planning being done.
No safety planning whatsoever.
Right. And they are in active fear, generally of several different potentially violent situations where, I've heard in the video and several other situations where women say that when they were locked up in the cell, it was the first time they felt safe.
Yeah.
Which is, someone should not have to go to prison to feel safe when she gets locked into a cell. But a lot of the women we're seeing do not feel safe and don't feel that their children are safe.
Nope.
Either.
Absolutely.
And don't feel like they can handle the dynamics of their family situations when they're getting into physical altercations and the shouting matches and the drug arrests over and over in the abusive relationships and in and out of jail.
Yeah, well, there's no conflict resolution,
right?
And there's no means of knowing that. You're in it.
You're seeing women in Drew House,
yes,
who are arrested, and often they have drug-related sentences.
Yes,
and they have children with them. And without talking about any of the women in particular, have you, or in your other work, have you seen women where you think that you could comment on cases like this where you think you've saved, where women have been diverted from ending up in these longer-term cases where they might have gone away for a long time in a worse domestic violence case?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. In fact, I actually.
Do you think we've helped people avoid that?
I actually have had a tenant where she did wind up getting a domestic violence charge, where she had a boyfriend, and she was in the house for quite a long period of time, almost over 3 years, and she really didn't engage in relationships or anything. I could count maybe 2 boyfriends, and the one he attacked her. She fought back, and she wound up arrested. And believe it or not, that would probably be the only one that I would see, that I would have seen long term, you know, because there's just sometimes you wind up, you come across women who really don't want to deal with what's going on with them. And this is cultural, okay? She's from another country. And in her mind, it's not domestic violence. In her mind is, you know, this is what we do. We fight, you know, and then we keep it going.
So what do you think helped change the situation with her? Like, what helped resolve it? Because we have all these other service providers on the phone. So it's helpful if you can share a little bit about what helped to resolve that situation so she didn't end up having to go away to prison for a long time and didn't escalate the situation.
Look, we had to bail her out. That's first and foremost. But,
okay. But she had people to bail her out.
But we did, you know. And one of the things I think that became helpful is getting her informed, you know, and informed in a way that she could understand culturally. You know, when you come from the West Indies, it's different on how you would deal with something from here in America, you know. And so getting her to sit down and giving her the information in a way that she can understand that it's not just, you know, the fact that you come from another country. It's wrong. This is wrong, you know, and this, you don't have to be subjected to this, you know. So it took working on, but it took sending her to domestic violence workshops. It took sending her to support groups. It also took me, you know, bringing outside resources in to have a smaller, intimate group with those who I know might have been in domestic violence, you know, unhealthy relationships. And so finally, she got it. She got it. She realized and admitted that this is not healthy. It's very unhealthy, and I don't want a part of it anymore.
And she has children with her.
And she has children with her. And believe it or not, you know, again, you know, when we talk about this, you know, we have to look at all the other dynamics, the factors. You know, we talk about classism, racism, all of that stuff. This culturally, you know, there's a lot of cultures that domestic violence is accepted. It's accepted because the women are servant to the male.
Yeah.
You know, so it's a part of their culture. I mean, we know that this is not right, but to them, it's just a part of their culture.
Yeah.
So just getting her to and that was a hump. You know, that was definitely challenging.
Well, and a lot of what I'm hearing. I mean, I'm hearing what you did and all of the different resources you brought in, but the other kind of the umbrella that's important to me, the what's weaving it all together, is you and the attention and the investment that you made and the very strong message that you cared and that other people cared and that you were invested in helping her understand that she is a human being whose life is worthy of protecting and that she is someone who deserves for people to care about her and that she deserves to have a better quality of existence than she was having.
Absolutely,
yeah.
Because you know what happens is that when you hear of something like this, and I was off when it actually happened, and, you know, so once I found out, you know, on my Sunday, my off day, I was here coming to bail her out.
Right.
But most importantly, it triggered something in me.
Right.
You know, because when you work with your tenants or your clients, whoever they are, participants, you know, it becomes somewhat personal because this is who you work with. These are the people who are in your life every day. You know,
we want people to do well, right?
Absolutely. And so it triggered something in me as to say, oh, I need her to get help immediately.
Right. Yep.
Immediately. I don't want her
and to know that we're here for her.
Absolutely.
Yep. All right, can we go to let's go to the next slide. Although there's, I don't know how much we need our slides, but so another factor I just want to bring in here is something that we see quite a bit at the Women's Prison Association, especially after we work with women who have been locked up in women's prisons. A lot of women we see have been victimized by men before they have been locked up, and many women then do not choose to be in intimate relationships with men again after. I mean, many do, but a lot of women identify as lesbian. Maybe they did before and were in relationship. I'm not sure how women define themselves in terms of their sexual orientation, but they're not in relationships with men again, but do find themselves in domestic violence situations with other women. And there is this additional stigma and concern then about violence in the relationships with female partners. And so that sometimes comes up in our work too. And I find that sometimes staff are a little bit surprised. And I think it's something that I just want to put out there that, of course, everybody who's working in this field should be aware of. Certainly it's coming up quite a bit among the women that we're seeing, because women we're seeing who have been in the criminal justice system, who are in violent relationships with men, also are showing up in violent relationships with women and having trouble dealing with them and need help and support. And it's something that we really need to kind of expect and be on the lookout for and be willing to help women negotiate and help them, plan for. We really need to always be doing safety planning with the clients that we're working with.
Absolutely.
So, looking at this next set of questions, Sharon, in terms of advocates and people working with women who have criminal justice history and violence history, what should we be thinking about in terms of trauma that women may have experienced before they were locked up or while they're locked up, which can certainly can trigger trauma, or when she comes home or after she gets incarcerated?
I think that, first there's definitely a level of vulnerability even before a woman or a person gets abused. Even for myself, when I think back, that my vulnerability was I was grieving. I was grieving, and that I allowed, it blinded, I wouldn't even say it blinded me, but it just put this cloak over everything that I should have seen or I did see and didn't even pay attention to, because this is someone who's professing their love. I didn't love him. I wasn't in love with him.
I think you told me you wanted him to take care of you.
Absolutely. Just the security, because, come on, when you build your life around someone and they just die unexpectedly, it almost became like I don't care attitude, And I think for women before incarceration, it's a vulnerability. And then they look for they wind up, even when they incarcerated and they wind up getting with a woman partner, they look for those traits. They look for those traits, those same traits. And then you wind up with someone who's almost similar because they then prey on your vulnerability. Because what happens is that you get with someone else and you talk about how, you did all that you could do and that you was a good person to this person and they beat you or they did this. And then the next person with the same traits that you done picked out, now sees a way on how they can control you as well. So it becomes a rotating cycle.
You broke that cycle. So talk about how you and other people find a way to do that? Because you did a lot of work inside, I know.
Oh, yes, I did a lot of work on it. You know what? I came to the conclusion I had to pinpoint the root of why did I allowed this to happen, or because there were signs even before I married him. I just married him off a whim. Yeah, he said he was madly in love with me and whatever, you know. But I had to look back and see that I had to deal with what was going on with me before I got to that point. And it was that grief. When I never went to the funeral, I didn't go to the wake, I didn't do any of my family went, I didn't. So I never had closure. You have to have closure, you know, on whatever it is. Especially as an adult, you know, because although I was 20, I was still considered an adult. You have to have closure, and if I would have had that closure, that would have never happened, you know. And I realized I always had a strong personality. Yeah. So that, for me, it shouldn't have happened. I shouldn't have been even with him. I'm very clear with that, you know. And just working on yourself, you know, that inner strength that you have to know that I deserve better, I am better, and that this is the things that I would like to have in my partner, in my mate, in my husband, wife, whatever, you know, and just working on yourself. See, people don't do that.
Yeah.
People
That's hard.
do not work
That's
on
the
it.
hard
Very
work,
hard.
Sharon. Yeah.
Very hard to address that woman in the mirror. Very hard. Because a lot of times people don't like what they see.
Well, that's definitely the hardest work that we ask our clients to do. When people say to me, oh, aren't we giving our clients a break when we do community-based alternatives to incarceration? I always say, you know, for our clients would almost always choose jail over having to look in the mirror and do the hard work of the internal work, because really developing into someone who feels like someone who has self-efficacy and really feels confident and can account for who I am today and how I have gotten here. It's a much more painful process than letting someone else tell me what to do. I may not always like it, but it's more difficult. So
it definitely is.
I mean, in the interest of time, because I think there might be some questions, there were a couple other things that you talked to me about in terms of just the experiences of trauma, some things that may not seem rational when we're hearing from people and, you know, as providers, that even if women have had experiences of trauma many years ago, that women may be very afraid. Even if the person who abused them died 20 years ago, a woman may have a fear that her family is coming after her when she comes out, or that the person who victimized her is around the corner. So there can be this ever-present fear for safety, or that people are always angry at her, and so that it's important to help a woman find a way to plan for her safety and find a way to feel safe, and also, if possible, to find a way to make amends or to find some way to get to a feeling of peace with that person, if there's a way to come to forgiveness or something. And coming to the next slide, there was a kind of amazing story that you told me, Sharon, about your history. You had been victimized as an adult, and you told me that you made the decision to meet with your former husband, who was the person who had abused you, who was not the person who you had killed, but and that you made the decision to meet with him. And can you just tell everybody for a minute about that, because I think that was an amazing, liberating
absolutely
thing.
You know, believe it or not, that after a long term of coming home, that there's always that fear in the back of your head that, you know, something can happen to you. You feel like you don't deserve to be home. You know, you have this sense of guilt that, you know, especially when someone died, whether they, you know, people feel like they deserved it or not. There's always this guilt, you know, that a person carries around. So I know upon coming home after all of this work and self processing and self help, I came home and I knew that I needed, there was like a piece of me, I needed to free myself, you know, because I was so angry. I was doggone angry, you know, about what had happened to me because, I mean, you know, fractured jaws, you name it, fractured ribs, you name it, you know, and I was angry for that part of my life, you know, and so one day my sister had actually called me and said, guess who I saw? And he, you know, expressed remorse and he was sorry and he asked about you and he wanted your phone number, but I took his just to be, you know, cordial. So I got the number from her and I pondered on it for quite a while, but then I called him and we actually met up and we went to BBQs, and I was on my tab because I wanted to control of this. So we met at BBQs down on 23rd Street and 8th Avenue, and we sat in there, and I let him have it from A to Z. You know, it was very, you know, respectful, but yet, you know, this is how you made me feel. This is what I went through in my life. After the fact, I was only 20 years old, and he was 28, 8 years older than me. And I felt like he should have been example for me. But then I also made it clear to him that he did the best that he could, because I was clear that he had a lot of traumas in his life. We went through, I mean, we were there for hours, and I felt so rejuvenated. I felt so free, and because I was able to tell him that, you know, I literally had to go underground for months without my mother, my parents knowing where I was. I didn't see my daughter. And that hurted me so much that I had to give it to him, you know. He cried. He was remorseful and, you know, but as I told him, you know, we will never be friends. You know, we're not going to have any kind of friendship on any level, but I just needed to do this for me. And I felt good.
And you forgave him.
That door closed. That last chapter ended, you know, and he's having problems himself, health problems, relationship problems, all kinds of things. And I could tell him, get some counseling, get therapy. But that's the best thing that I could have did for myself.
It took a lot of guts, though. It was a brave thing to do.
Was to free myself. Yeah. You know, it wasn't for him, you know, but then being in social work, understanding that most abusers have been abused themselves, has been abusees, you know, and so not to let him off the hook, but I understood because his mother abused him. He didn't know his father, you know, so he grew up on the streets. So, you know, I just told him, I forgive you. I forgive you. I forgive you for everything, you know, and have a good life because I'm happy now, you know, and that gave me so much closure.
Well, thank you, Sharon.
Yeah.
Thanks. I guess next slide. Thanks. That was very helpful. I think we have some questions. I'm going to just do I want to skip ahead to we've talked about what the helpful interventions are.
Right.
In general, we've really talked about the importance of safety planning, and to very quickly recap what the implications are for DV providers. You know, as a provider of social services for women with criminal justice involvement, we make the presumption that women have probably been in situations where they've been victimized. And it is our orientation, and we really urge other providers to try to look to others who are in the working with people in the criminal justice system to have this orientation to try to divert women to sentencing situations, or to always try to divert women to non-secure environments, because secure environments like jails and prisons are much more likely to re-traumatize. They're more likely to be awful and just to cause trauma again and be upsetting and cause and also to have people in community settings where self-efficacy can really be promoted and developed, and where women can work on the other issues like education and job skills and living a healthy life in a community environment, the kinds of things that help people that we talk about in terms of reentry and a long-term healthy life without having the interruption and the disruption of being removed from the community in the first place. Obviously, it's better if we don't have people going into the disruptive and potentially traumatizing environment of a prison or a jail. So I think that's probably a good place for us to wrap up, because we've talked about, for Sharon, unless you have any other summarizing points you want to make in case there's some questions.
Well, the only thing that I can really add on to say is that, people coming home from out of the prison system, with coming home, even working on yourself while incarcerated, you still have these traumas that are set in the back of your mind, your heart, your soul, and coming home, one of the biggest things that can really be done is just having that wraparound support, completely wraparound support for them coming home, and making sure that, they get the necessary help, that there's safety planning, and that there is someone that they can speak to, someone that they feel comfortable with, because that's one. In prison, I didn't have that. I know that in prison there wasn't, we had a counselor that worried about how many tickets you got in the past 3 months. There wasn't any social workers.
And you were at Bedford.
Yes.
That's a good prison.
Yes. And there wasn't, anyone except for a psychiatrist on the 3rd floor, of the RMU building. And to go there, the first thing they would want to do is medicate you. So you don't really get to talk about it unless you befriend someone. But if they also have their own traumas and issues, there's not much help that they can do for you going through their own.
Mm-hmm.
So it's really important that coming home, that counseling and that just that support of that understanding that a person can use, coming in, because it's not just the traumas of the past. The traumas of the present is now coming home and being home, So
yep.
just the wraparound services of that.
Thanks, Sharon.
You're welcome.
Thank you both, Sharon and Georgia, for really an excellent exchange there. And, we actually don't have a ton of questions because I think you did such a good job of answering them, and Georgia of asking them. And thank you so much. I mean, one of them was, is there an actual study done about women switching their sexual orientation due to the violence perpetrated to them by males? If anybody knows the answer to that, if it's not among the presenters, if you could put it in the chat, or you could send that to us at the National Clearinghouse, and we can share that back with people. Any of the presenters want to?
I'm not aware of any formal studies on that particular topic. I do know that women, being the relational creatures that we are, tend to form both family and sexual relationships very differently inside and outside. We may have partners of different sexes. We may have families for the period of time that we're inside. I mean, that's the extent of whatever informal studies there are that I'm aware of. I don't know, Georgia or Sharon, if you have anything to add.
Right. I mean, I think that, I mean, I did a master's degree in human sexuality way back when, and
Wow.
we like to label. Everybody
Mhm.
wants to label everybody, but sexual orientation is really, it's thoughts, feelings, and behaviors. And so, what people do is not how we would define someone's sexual orientation. It's one part of what it would be. So, really our sexual orientation is a continuum, and how people choose to express their sexuality certainly can change throughout our lifetimes. And so it is definitely a phenomenon that women will, by choice, elect to engage in sexual intimacy with other women while they are locked up, and that many will choose to continue the behavior once they are out.
Yes.
And you do not hear this as a choice among men, as a choice necessarily, and you do hear about it, but I do not know of any studies.
Yeah, that's me too.
And if any of the participants do
but I am
know
curious
of one,
if anyone does know. So
send it to us, and then we can get it out to the group, to all the participants.
But we do want to label everybody, don't we?
Yeah,
like
we
as a
sure
society,
do.
we just have this great need to fit in categories. It's like.
Well, just a quick reflection. Sharon, I loved your line that your shoes were smoking. But I feel like, Georgia, you and Sharon were talking about that, time is the enemy while inside, but once outside, there's just such limited time to get so much done, and it's such a setup. I mean, obviously, most importantly, it's a setup for the women who are reentering. But I mean, Georgia, I think you were talking from a service provider's perspective. It's impossible to achieve what is required of people from a service provider standpoint as well. And so that really stood out, Sharon, about the shoes of smoking. I mean, that is not a way for somebody to be able to do all of the necessary regrouping that I think you guys talked about so really well. And I thought, like, doing that hard work about what safety really means in a very profound way, and looking into the mirror and really doing that kind of necessary internal work, and how hard it is. And I think that whole conversation about, like, what does that really look like, it could be another webinar series.
Absolutely. And also, I just would like to add that education also is another key aspect to that, because if it wasn't for me going to college while in Bedford, then I wouldn't have been able to get my first job upon coming home was a case manager job, which then allowed me to pay rent and to get my own apartment and to pay rent, Whereas when women come out and they don't have the degree or the GED or anything, then it leaves them to minimum wage, which we all know that's not going to pay rent anywhere. So then they get stagnated. They get caught up in a transitional, which then in 6 months' time, they still not able to meet that, meet the criterion.
Well, and it's interesting, at WPA we finally got a contract signed to open up transitional homeless beds for women with criminal justice history. We just signed the contract last week. I think that the shelter will open. It'll be 39 beds. It will open in our landmark townhouse probably in about a month. We have been talking about opening this shelter for, 2 years. I'm embarrassed that it's not open yet. And now, of course, we're like hustling to open the doors. But for 2 years, we've been trying to open it. So it's absolutely parallel process. What's going on for the women we're trying to help is happening for our agency. It's happening in government. It's happening in the prison, and at Bedford Hills, where Sharon was locked up. They are really trying to do a lot of good work, and they're trying to implement Moving On, which is this gender-specific. Sharon's been gone for 9 years, thank goodness, but they're trying to do some really good work there. But there's so many barriers, even when people are trying to do the right thing. So we're all, we're all kind of feeling the system in a different place.
Well, and it's so great that after 2 years, it's a shame it took 2 years, and it's so great it happened. And then it's 39 beds, and you're in New York City. I mean,
yep. And I cannot wait to be full.
That's right.
Yeah. Well, you're not going to have any problem there.
I know.
Yeah. Well, and I guess I would also just add to the end from a criminal justice and corrections perspective is that Sharon's experience inside is very much like the experiences of many other women in many other facilities around the country. There's very little inside that's, at this point, very helpful. And if there are women's prisons that are thinking about trauma and all the ways we've talked about it today, they have a program that's called the Trauma Program. Yeah. And mostly what we're trying to say to folks is, that may be helpful, but that's not really what being trauma-informed means. It's sort of about the environment. It's about how you talk. It's what you do. It's how you discipline. It's how you provide incentives. It's all of that. Yeah. And very few programs. We've had a number of women begin to tell us inside, this batterers program or this anger management program or that program, it's really not helpful to me. It's not really addressing any of the issues that I need to talk about. And so I think corrections and criminal justice are coming along, but it's a very, very slow process.
Yes, it is. And it needs to be individualized.
Yes, absolutely.
Everybody has a unique story and deals with it in a unique way,
Yes.
And thank you, Becky, because that was really helpful. And some of the discussion was about groups for women with criminal justice histories and who are getting sent to batterers programs, and that is a whole other conversation that a lot of people are engaging with. And actually there was a webinar last week on it by the Center for Court Innovation, and that's probably available on the website. And, I just want to say how much I appreciate you guys sharing your information, and Sharon, you sharing your experiences. And I think Georgia did a really fine introduction, and just really appreciating your willingness to come forward and talk about it. And I just think that, Georgia, when you were talking about, what it is to have a life where a lot of bad things have happened, and then you end up with a woman ends up with a criminal justice history, and what it is that people can do and should do and maybe need to do better on helping people be in the world where they really have their basic needs met and feel like they deserve it because they do. I feel like that's a whole nother conversation too, about real skills building about that. So I'm just putting that out there, Georgia, Sharon, and Becky.
Okay.
Yes, absolutely.
And in the interest of time, I just want to go around and see if anybody else has final words, because, wow, Sharon, thank you so much for sharing your experience.
Thank you. It's definitely my pleasure. And if you ever need me again, I am here.
Okay. And Georgia and Becky, it was terrific once again. And, I have my fingers crossed that this one is in fact recorded, which I believe it is, so that other people will be able to hear your really excellent comments. So, Georgia, any last comments?
No, thank you. And
just terrific.
It's a pleasure.
Okay. All right. So just everybody who's still on, an evaluation will pop up, and we'll also send that to you. If you can do that, it's really helpful to Sharon and Becky and Georgia and to us. And one of the questions we ask is, what other webinars do you want to see us doing in the future? So you have an opportunity to say more about what other webinars you do want us to do. So please take, really it's 2 minutes. It's really helpful. Thank you all, and thank you to our presenters again.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Georgia, thank you so much.
Oh, thank you. Bye-bye.
I hope to meet you someday, Sharon.
Yes.
You're good.
Bye-bye.
Great job. Thank you.
Bye.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Okay.